In coming decades, Europe might become dependent on natural gas supplies from the United States. Presently, the old continent is heavily relying on Russian gas, and it is trying to diversify energy resources and supply routes. However, in the foreseeable future, the European Union as well as the rest of the continent might get dual dependency instead. I'm your host Kasim, and thanks for joining me for another KJ vid. Just before we start, please kindly visit our website kjvids.co.uk and subscribe to one of our plans, which will give you unlimited access to our content and the full transcripts of these reports. According to the European Commission official statistic, the European Union imports 77% of its natural gas. In 2018, 43% of that came from Russia, while 33% originated in Norway and 9% was from Algeria. Less than 1% was from the United States. Until 2000, the US exported relatively small volumes of natural gas and mostly by pipeline to Mexico and Canada. The United States is now the leading natural gas producer in the world, even though Russia holds the largest amount of gas reserves in the world. America is also currently the third largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, LNG, and it is expected to surpass Australia and Qatar and become the world's largest exporter of LNG within 5 years, according to a recent International Energy Agency report. Also, Energy Information Agency reported that in March and April of this year, the US LNG exports to Europe averaged 1.7 billion cubic feet per day, which is 10 times higher than in the same months in 2018. Even though the US imports large amounts of petroleum, in December last year, Washington exported more crude oil and fuel than it imported for the first time on record. The top 5 destination countries of US petroleum exports, export volume, and share of total petroleum exports in 2018 were Mexico, Canada, Japan, Brazil, and South Korea. Although Europe is still not a significant importer of the American energy, that might change in the future. Presently, Europe is looking for alternatives to Russian gas and oil. Reportedly this summer, Ukraine bought 80,000 tons of back-in crude from the US. Also, Germany imported 1 cargo of the US oil. Italy increased US imports to a monthly record of nearly 700,000 tons in June, and countries such as Greece and Croatia have also taken several cargoes of the American oil. In addition, Polish authorities announced that they plan to reduce dependency on Russian gas by striking long-term contracts for deliveries of liquefied natural gas from the United States. Poland also bought 3 cargoes of the US oil this year. Still, liquid natural gas from the United States, which is shipped via boat, is much more expensive than gas piped in from Russia. Even though transportation costs are smaller for Europe than for other markets, they are still higher than the import of the Russian gas. That, however, does not mean Europe will not be buying American gas. Some EU countries, primarily Poland and the Baltic states, are ready to pay a premium in order to diversify their supplies. Poland plans to build a floating liquefied natural gas terminal in Gdansk. It is expected that this project, as well as additional sections of gas pipelines that will bring out the gas into the Polish system, will be ready in 2025. Russia is working on 2 major pipelines that aims to bypass Ukraine, which is firmly under the US sphere of influence and is merely an instrument that Washington is using against Moscow. The Kremlin recently built the Turk Stream pipeline, which currently connects Russia and Turkey but not the rest of Europe. It is unclear when and if at all planned follow-on projects to bring Russian gas from Turk Stream into Europe will be implemented. On the other hand, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which should provide Russian gas to Germany, will not be completed before the spring or summer 2020, and it is still uncertain if it will be fully operational. Since the United States strongly opposes the project, even if the Nord Stream 2 eventually starts working, it would not be improbable for Germany and other rich EU countries to buy relatively cheap Russian gas, while Poland, Ukraine and the Baltic states would be forced to buy expensive US gas. According to the United States, Secretary of Energy Rick Perry, the US move on liquefied natural gas exports will undermine the economic authority of Nord Stream 2. When you get a 20-year contract signed for LNG and you know that the product is going to be delivered in a timely fashion over the next 20 years, why would you want to go to another source of energy, he asked. In other words, the United States can easily put pressure on European countries to start buying expensive American rather than cheap Russian gas. That way, relatively poor EU member states might help the US economy in a classical neo-vassal manner. Some analysts speculate that the US is actually not exporting its own gas and oil, but is exploiting energy from countries like Libya and Nigeria. Libya is known not only as a major oil producer, but also an exporter of natural gas, both by LNG and pipeline to Europe. In spite of the fact that the country has been devastated by war, which goes on for the past 8 years, the oil production and export goes flawlessly. Nigeria is the 10th most petroleum-rich nation, and by far the most affluent in Africa. It is the biggest gas producer and LNG exporter in sub-Saharan Africa. It is worth mentioning that Shell has been working in Nigeria since 1936, and the company currently dominates gas production in the country that is constantly on the brink of conflict between Christians and Muslims. Although there is no hard evidence that the US is selling Nigerian and Libyan oil to Europe, such practice certainly exists. For example, according to Stratfor and some other sources, Russia is buying gas from Turkmenistan at embarrassingly low prices and then exporting it to Europe. While Turkmenistan is a marginal supplier for Russia, which has its own massive gas business, there is an obvious Russian interest in importing energy from this country. Presently, Norway is one of the countries that is supplying gas and oil to the EU, but in the near future, the Scandinavian nation might have to start importing energy. Norway will be on its last third of natural gas reserves by 2035, according to Tord Lien, the country's former Minister of Petroleum and Energy. As per official statistics, gas reserves in Russia will last for 80 years, and the US reserves will last for about 90 years. The actual number of years will depend on the amount of natural gas consumed each year, imports and exports, and also on additions to natural gas reserves. In the coming decades, both the United States and Russia, as well as China, are expected to bring under control all energy-rich countries in order to assure gas, oil and coal supplies primarily to their own populations. Since the major world powers will unlikely fight a war against each other over the global energy, they will rather make some lucrative deals and redistribute the world's energy resources. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ vid. We hope you learned something from this video and would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please don't forget to support KJ vids by subscribing to one of our plans on our website, which will give you unlimited access to our content and the full transcripts of these reports. Thanks for watching again and see you next time.